Welcome to day 3 part 1. Now the first I'm reading after this will be sad cuz it's where homosexuality is illegal. Anyway, let's get started. Shade, a term used to describe an insult, typically in the form of blunt criticism, and often used to point out someone's flaws or faults. Sickening, to be so attractive it makes others sick, often used to describe RuPaul. Glamazon, a term used to describe a tall, glamorous, and assertively self-confident woman, also a reference to RuPaul's song of the same name. Kiki, a term used for gossip. Heather, a term used to describe a particularly fierce drag queen. Alaska Talks, a self-coined term by season 5 contestants Roxy Andrews, Alaska, and Detox to describe their alliance and friendship. Okay, and now here's the 71 countries. India. In India, same-sex relationships have a maximum punishment of 10 years in prison. But being non-binary is okay. Singapore. In Singapore, same-sex relationships between men are punishable by up to 2 years in prison. There is no punishment for women. Egypt. Same-sex relationships aren't illegal in Egypt, but the government uses law that state violation of honor by threat and practicing immoral and indecent behavior to convict individuals suspect of engaging in gay relationships. For example, one young man was sentenced to 17 years in prison for merely placing his profile on a gay dating site. Jamaica. Same-sex relationships are punishable by up to life in prison in Jamaica. Malaysia. In Malaysia, same-sex relationships are punishable by up to 20 years in prison if the sexual act took place in a region that follows Sharia law. Additional punishments, including whippings, may be administered. Morocco. In Morocco, individuals who are convicted of engaging in same-sex relationships can receive a fine or up to 3 years in jail. Kenya. Okay, I'm not gonna say same-sex relationships because I'll get tired of saying it over and over again. Anyway, it's punishable from 14 to 21 years in prison. Even attempting to engage in activity is a felony punishable by up to 5 years in prison. Nigeria. For most, it's up to 14 years. Iran. Punishable by death. Pakistan. Between 2 and 10 years. Lebanon. 1 year in prison. Algeria. Punishable by a fine or up to 3 years of imprisonment. Uzbekistan, up to 3 years. Saudi Arabia, punishable by death. Stoning is the typical method used to administer this punishment. Tunisia, punishable by up to 3 years in prison between men. Ethiopia, between 1 and 15 years in prison. Trinidad and Tobago, up to 25 years. Ghana, between 5 and 25 years in prison. Qatar, 25 years in prison, but if Muslim, subjected to Sharia law and sentenced to additional whippings or death. Kuwait, punishable by up to 7 years. Zimbabwe, fine or imprisonment for men. Uganda, between 14 years to life. United Arab Emirates, punishable by a variety of sentences, with death being the most severe in regions that follow Sharia law. You can be deported if you're not from the United Arab Emirates. Cameroon, fine up to 5 years in prison or death. Eritrea, up to 3 years in prison. Sudan, between flogging and 5 years in prison for a first offense and death for multiple offenses. Angola, punishable by fines and prison time. Syria, up to 3 years in prison. Yemen, depends on gender and marital status. An unmarried man is subjected to whippings and up to 1 year in prison. A married man is subjected to death by stoning. A woman may receive anywhere between 3 and 7 years in prison. Myanmar, a fine or 10 years to life in prison. Afghanistan, long prison sentence or execution. Oman, anywhere between 6 months to 3 years in prison. Tanzania, between 25 years and life. Senegal, fine or between 1 and 5 years in prison. Sri Lanka, fine or imprisonment. Namibia, prison sentence. Eswatini, fine and imprisonment. Libya, up to 4 years in prison. Bangladesh, fines and up to 10 years in prison. Brunei, in early 2019, it was punishable by stoning. But now you can be punished by up to a decade in prison. Papua New Guinea, up to 14 years. Zambia, up to 14 years. Burundi, fine and up to 2 years in prison. Guinea, fine and a prison sentence between 6 months and 3 years. Mauritius, up to 5 years in prison for men. Somalia, up to 3 years in prison, or in regions that operate under Sharia law, the maximum punishment is death by stoning. Samoa, up to 7 years in prison. Barbados, up to life. Sierra Leone, up to life in prison with hard labor. Liberia, up to 1 year. Mauritania, death by stoning. Turkmenistan, punishable by up to 5 years in prison between men. Malawi, men up to 14 years in prison, along with possible corporal punishment. Women, up to 5 years in prison. Botswana, a fine and up to 7 years. Togo, fine and up to 3 years. Maldives, men, banishment, whipping, and up to 6 years in prison. Woman, house arrest. Bhutan, between 1 month and 1 year. Grenada, up to 10 years. Tonga, whippings and up to 10 years. Guyana, ranging between 2 years and life. Dominica, up to 25 years in prison. Ex-gay therapy may also be required. Gambia, up to 14 years. Kiribati, up to 14 years. Comoros, fine and up to 5 years. Antigua and Barbuda, up to 15 years. Solomon Islands, up to 14 years. St. Kitts and Nevis, up to 10 years in prison with the possibility of hard labor. Tuvalu, 14 years. Up to 14 years. St. Lucia, fine and up to 10 years. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, punishable by up to 10 years. South Sudan, fines and up to 10 years. You can see that I did not list Palestine. You know why? Because same-sex relationships are only illegal in Gaza. Anywhere else, it's fine. And that's why I don't get why people say that queers for Palestine don't make sense. Because it's only Gaza where it's illegal. Also, with how things are going right now for the United States, we might actually be heading to where it can become illegal. I hope we don't head in that direction.